Okay, this time, Sergeants, can we please start the recordings?
PC recording is up.
Cloud is rolling. Back to you, Sergeant Bradley.
Okay, good morning and welcome to today's New York City Council hearing on Parks and Recreation. At this time, will all panelists please turn on your videos for verification purposes. To minimize disruption, place electronic devices on silent or on vibrate mode. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, you may begin.
Thank you so much, Sergeant. Good morning, everyone. Going virtual, I don't have a gavel, so I'm going to gavel in with this stapler over here. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our virtual hearing today before the Council's Committee on Parks and Recreation. My name is Acre Krishnan. I'm the chair of the Committee on Parks and Recreation and the council member from Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, Queens. I would like to acknowledge my fellow council members who are present today. We've been joined by council members Marte, Ung, Narcisse, Dinowitz, Menin, Holden, Lee, Velasquez, Moya, council members Carr, and council members Kagan. Thank you all for joining. And now I'd like to begin with my opening statement. Good morning and welcome to our virtual hearing on the issue of how the COVID-19 pandemic highlights inequity in the city's park system. The benefits of our parks are clear. They are critical for wellness, as access to open space has been shown to improve physical health and help reduce anxiety, stress, and depression. They even provide numerous economic benefits, such as savings in healthcare costs, savings in stormwater treatment costs, and increases in tourism spending and property values. During the height of the pandemic, when lockdown protocols started to close off New Yorkers to most aspects of city life, parks were one of the only resources that could provide some sort of recreational opportunities. As the weather warmed in the spring and summer, New Yorkers who were isolated indoors for many months craved to use their parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, courts, pools, and beaches once again. In fact, it is well known that park use increased tremendously during the pandemic. At no recent point in our city's history was the need to treat parks as crucial infrastructure highlighted more clearly than during the pandemic. And as I've always said, the issue of parks equity in our city is a matter of public health, is a matter of racial and economic justice. COVID-19 exposed serious flaws with how we provide open space and green space to all New Yorkers as a city. A brief history lesson for a minute. For most of the 20th century, the city properly funded its green spaces, helping to make it the nation's premier park system. In fact, during the 1960s, the city devoted a healthy 1.5% of its budget to the Parks Department. That's 60 years ago, the Parks Department budget was 1.5%. And today, we are fighting as a city to get our parks budget to 1%. Eventually, the financial crisis of the 1970s forced large cutbacks, and by the late 1980s, the parks budget had fallen to just 0.86% of the city's budget. The result was that many parks turned into places that New Yorkers avoided due to poor budgets and maintenance. A few statistics to reemphasize. As I mentioned before, park spending was about 1% of the city budget in 1960, 0.86% in 1986, 0.65% in 1991, 0.52% in 2000. Currently, the department's preliminary budget for fiscal year 2023 is $557.1 million and represents less than 1% of the entire city budget. This is approximately $62.8 million less than the fiscal year 22 adopted budget of $619.9 million. In other words, we have seen over the years a serious decrease and disinvestment by our city government in our parks, and that has continued. This has resulted in conservancies being formed to supplement public funds with privately raised money for parks. With this influx of private funds, many large and well-known parks saw a big turnaround in their status and once again became attractive recreational sites for city residents and visitors to the city. However, there are other parks in our city that have not received the same amount of investment from our city government, raising the question of, as these private and public partnerships began to grow in our city, was this to augment the city's budget and investments in our parks, or was this to replace the city's public spending of our parks? Because those parks that don't have a conservancy, that cannot rely on private and public partnerships, have also seen a serious inequity in their investments. A somewhat recent example of this imbalance was in 2012, when some of the largest parks in our city received millions of dollars, between $20 and $100 million. While in contrast, Flushing Meadows Corona Park in my home borough of Queens, a park surrounded by immigrant communities, some of the most diverse communities on the planet, attracted only $5,000 that same year of 2012 in its entire duration. While reliance on private funding and conservancies increased, public funding remained stagnant for many years. Even today, public funding consistently averages much less than 1% of the whole city's budget. Even as I mentioned before the cuts of the current preliminary budget, in fiscal year 2022, when the budget was a bit bigger at $620 million, it only represented 0.6% of the entire city's expense budget. The historical trend is clear. We have not funded our parks sufficiently. The equity problem is clear. We have not invested in all of the parks of our city, especially those in communities of color. It is concerning to see that Mayor Adams' proposed fiscal 23 expense budget for parks totals only $557.1 million. That still represents only a little more than half of 1% of the entire proposed city budget of $98.5 billion. Considering that we are rebounding from since fiscal year 2022 with the parks budget, now is not the time to be cutting back on investments in our green spaces. The long-term result of all of this is that we have seen a great disparity in how parks in certain neighborhoods have greater access to private funding and other resources, do much better than smaller neighborhood parks in lower income neighborhoods that can only rely on public funding. While the council and administration in recent years have recognized and sought to correct this disparity with the implementation of the Community Parks Initiative and Anchor Parks Initiative, as well as the stated desire to increase the parks budget, COVID has highlighted how far we still have to go, how the access to parks and open space is still not equitable across the city. We can see this also in the maintenance services of our parks. There have been numerous maintenance deficiencies that have affected city parks for decades. A 2018 report by the Center for an Urban Future entitled "A New Leaf: Revitalizing New York City's Aging Parks Infrastructure" found how our park system is aging rapidly. The average city park is approximately 77 years old, with roughly 40% of city pools having been built before 1950, with half of the Parks Department's recreation centers similarly built before that time. The department's waterfront facilities, from piers to bulkheads, marinas, and docks, are on average 80 years old. The report further highlighted that the average city park has not had any major investments since 1997. On top of that, through these budgets, we have seen that as public funding for parks has decreased, other agencies' budgets have increased. From fiscal year 2014 to FY 2019, the department's staffing levels in the Parks Department grew at a rate less than that of other city agencies, from 7,302 to 7,460. For example, while the Parks Department staff grew by only 2%, the Department of Corrections grew by 17%. While we are fighting to get green spaces in our poor communities of color, the same ones that are suffering most acutely from the absolute crisis at Rikers Island, we have seen our Parks Department grow barely in its staff, while the Department of Corrections staff has grown significantly. We have seen the way in which the lack of park space has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. While we face a report in the federal courts calling for a federal receiver for Rikers Island. If that doesn't show you the disparity between how we prioritize resources for communities of color, I don't know what else does. While it has been clearly documented that in many low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, where cases and death rates from COVID-19 were disproportionately high, residents lacked access to quality green space. In fact, more than 1.1 million New Yorkers did not have access to a park within a 10-minute walk of home when playgrounds, fields, and courts were closed. To put this in perspective, the average size of parkland in this city is only 6.4 acres in low-income neighborhoods, compared with 14 acres in wealthier neighborhoods. Further, the average park size is 7.8 acres in predominantly Black neighborhoods, compared with 29.8 acres in predominantly white neighborhoods. Generally, parks that serve low-income areas serve more people per acre than those in high-income areas. Now, I know this well for Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, Queens, where we rank 50 out of 51 when it comes to green space per capita in all of New York City's council districts. Neighborhoods like my own highlight this disparity dramatically. During the height of the pandemic, Jackson Heights had a COVID case rate of 4,706 per 100,000 people, which was the 5th worst in the city. And we averaged 2.28 square feet of open space per capita, which was the 4th worst. Elmhurst had a case rate of 3,977 per 100,000 people, which was the 15th worst in the city, and averaged 1.7 square feet of open space per capita. 1.7 square foot of open space per capita, not even plural, which was the worst in the whole city. I know we can and must do better than this. I hope to explore many of the great ideas out there that seek to improve equity, including vastly increasing the park's budget. We need 1% or $1 billion for parks. That is not it's only a historic increase because of how much our Parks Department has been disinvested in over these years when it comes to public funding. But by all means, by all measures, it is actually restoring or trying to restore what we've historically at one point had in our parks budget. We must expand the Community Parks Initiative, ensure that money raised through parks concessions goes back directly to parks, and encourage the target of philanthropic donations to benefit a broader range of parks. Finally, I'd like to note that we will also consider a piece of legislation that I have sponsored today. Intro number 173 would require the Parks Department to issue a semi-annual report identifying parks and playgrounds that have routinely failed inspections and submit a plan to the council on how the issues at such parks and playgrounds will be corrected. Regarding data from the Park Inspection Program, or PIP, recent years saw a trend of overall conditions and cleanliness features averaging acceptable ratings in the high 80s and low 90s percentage-wise. However, the most recent data indicates a slight drop since 2019, which I'd like to examine a bit as well, as whether the current PIP program is sufficient to indicate what the needs of the park systems are resource-wise. I think this bill can help us go a long way in knowing the areas of our park system that are in need of greater resources, of ensuring a timeline and accountability mechanism so those parks are repaired and fixed in a timely manner, and allow us a mechanism for directing resources to the areas with the greatest need. I hope we can use this hearing to reimagine how we can make a better and more equitable park system a reality for all New Yorkers in the short and long-term future. As we come out of this pandemic, we can do no less. Thank you. Now, as we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that going forward with this hearing and the ones going forward as well, we'd like to always start as a committee with hearing the testimony from 3 members of the public before the Parks Department. Myself, having testified as a civil rights lawyer for many years in front of the City Council's committees, I always felt it was important that those of our public are heard first, especially by any city administration and agency representatives, so that our communities, the voices of our communities, are truly heard instead of being made to wait till much later in a hearing when perhaps members from the agency aren't present or commissioners aren't present. So that'll be a new policy that we set going forward from this hearing and from there. And I want to thank Commissioner Donahue for also agreeing to listen to our members of the public first as our part of our first panel. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Committee Counsel Chris Sartori, to go over some procedural items.
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, and good morning. I'm Chris Sartori, Senior Counsel to the Commission on Parks and Recreation, and I'll be moderating this hearing. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that you'll be on mute until you are called on to testify, at which point you'll be unmuted by the host. During the hearing, I'll be calling on the various panelists to testify, so please listen for your name to be called, as I will periodically be announcing who the upcoming panelists will be. We'll at this hearing, as the chair mentioned, we will be first hearing testimony from members of the public, followed by testimony from members of the Parks Department. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question of the administration or of a specific panelist, please use the Zoom raise hand function and I'll call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, including the time that it takes to answer such questions. For members of the public, we'll be limiting speaking time to 3 minutes in order to accommodate all who wish to speak today. As the chair mentioned earlier, we'll be hearing testimony from 3 members of the public. For these panelists and all panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the sergeant at arms will give you the go-ahead to begin upon setting the timer. So please wait for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before starting your testimony. I will now call on the various panelists. We will first be hearing testimony from Mayowa Adewumi, who is a high school student, followed by Charisse Palomino from New Yorkers for Parks, followed by Heather Lubov of the City Parks Foundation. And I will now call on Mayowa to please come forward and testify. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Good morning. My name is Mayowa Adewumi, and I'm a 10th grader at Midwood High School. I participate in the Quality of Life Innovation Program, which fosters a spirit of civic engagement and social innovation among high school students. Thank you to the Parks Committee of the City Council for the opportunity to speak about our city's park system and how it impacts young people. I live in Canarsie, Brooklyn, and am grateful to reside near great spaces like Canarsie Park and Shirley Chisholm State Park. While these large spaces are very nice and modern, I noticed that the same doesn't hold true for many of the parks and playgrounds directly around me. These smaller, more local spaces are often not as nice, and because of that, are not as desirable for use by the community. I see this every day coming home from school at Center's playground, where much of the equipment is rusted and rainwater sits for days on the ground under the swings. New York City's park system has been under and inequitably funded for 40 years. By keeping everyone home for so long, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it increasingly clear just how important parks are for public health and safety. Previous COVID-related budget cuts, as well as the mayor's proposed preliminary budget, would result in thousands of lost park jobs and ultimately threaten the conditions of our parks. The mayor can start to fix these problems by delivering on his promise to dedicate 1% of the city's budget to parks. The city council has the power to push him to deliver on this promise, and the Parks Committee should do that. Considering all that's gone on in the world and in the city, New Yorkers need a well-funded park system that is safe, clean, and equitable. Young people and communities of color deserve a better, more equitable park system. This is why New Yorkers for Parks, the Playfair Coalition, and student leaders like myself are asking for an increase in the parks budget to 1% of the city's budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn it to Chair Krishnan, who has a question or comment.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Maiwa, for your testimony, for coming in front of us today, and to really highlighting the issue through your advocacy of how important parks equity is in our city too. So thank you so much, and keep up the great work too. And looking forward to our work together to keep fighting for parks equity in our city.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Charisse Palomino, followed by Heather Luboff.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. My name is Charisse Palomino, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Programs at New Yorkers for Parks. We are the founding member of the Playfair Coalition, which includes over 400 organizations across the 5 boroughs. Thank you to the Parks Committee for the opportunity to speak about parks equity. I also want to thank Chair Krishnan for his leadership on this important issue. COVID has highlighted the critical needs of our park system, including spotlighting inequities in access, infrastructure, and maintenance. The city's decade-long divestment in parks continues to exacerbate these tragic inequities in our park system. The City Council and the Mayor can fix it by making 1% of the city budget, making the investment of 1% of the city budget into parks. Many parks and playgrounds need urgent investments in maintenance and upkeep. Parks like Oracle Playground in Fort Greene lacks basic functioning equipment for kids of all ages and abilities. And newly designed parks have workout equipment for the community, but many like Marcus Garvey Park still do not. Parks like Joyce Kilmer Park in the Bronx and Rufus King Park in Jamaica constantly have litter problems. With a well-funded parks department, our parks and playgrounds can be properly maintained. Too many parks advocates and community leaders invest their time volunteering to do jobs that the New York City Parks Department has not been able to adequately fund, like cleaning up parks and gardening. New York is the greatest city in the world with a park system that does not reflect modernity, nor have the proper infrastructure to support the climate crisis we're living in. We are overdue for a transformative investment in our park system. 1% of the city budget can ensure that parks are well maintained and equitably serving New Yorkers of all communities and backgrounds. The New York City Parks Department does a valiant job maintaining these aging resources, but needs more funding to do so. It is time to allocate 1% of the city budget to parks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we do have a question from Councilmember Narcisse.
Oh, I was waiting for the turn when it comes taking the council. I'm just excited. I put my hands up after the testimony that I will be asking my question.
Very good.
I'm so excited for my young lady here from Canarsie. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to hearing from Heather Luboff. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Good morning and happy Earth Day, everyone. Good morning, Chair Krishnan and members of the committee. I'm Heather Luboff. I'm the Executive Director of City Parks Foundation, and we are a citywide nonprofit that uses programming to bring New Yorkers into and to care for their neighborhood parks. We reach 310,000 New Yorkers in 350 parks each year through free sports, arts, and environmental education programs, and Partnerships for Parks, a community building program that we co-manage with New York City Parks, and that is a central broker in our city stewardship system. Parks are the most democratic public resources. Each community starts at a different place and needs different resources, and equity is only achieved when communities that have historically been under-resourced get more. Initially, the Council's Parks Equity Initiative matched the administration's investment in community outreach on the New York City Parks side by funding City Parks Foundation staff to conduct more intensive engagement and to provide training, grants, coaching, and fiscal sponsorship that now empowers more than 500 park groups and 25,000 volunteers to address local needs that are meaningful to their neighborhoods. The initiative also provides each council member with funds to address hyperlocal programming needs in parks. Our surveys show how important this funding is. The overwhelming concerns of park groups today are funding and fundraising. As well, the most common goal is the desire to engage their community in more public events. And that's a need that was laid bare during the pandemic when parks were essential. During the pandemic, we saw a decline of nearly 100 park groups and thousands of individual volunteers, many of whom lived in the hardest hit neighborhoods, and corporate volunteerism all but disappeared. As the city recovers and launches the next phase of the Community Parks Initiative to renovate 100 neglected parks, we ask for an increase in support through the Parks Equity Initiative to prioritize outreach in these and other historically under-resourced parks and to expand our ability to reach communities in languages other than English. During the pandemic, we encouraged resource sharing. We facilitated collaboration between funded conservancies and unfunded volunteer groups, and we administered a $7 million private relief fund that helped mitigate the impact of cuts to parks nonprofits during a time of increased usage. But the private sector cannot replace public support. The mayor's budget would result in the loss of thousands of jobs, threatening the livelihoods and conditions of our parks. Our New York City Parks-supported Partnerships for Parks team is already facing freezes of 8% of its staff through PEGs. So we call on the city to recognize parks as essential infrastructure and keep the promise of 1% for parks, increase funding for the Parks Equity Initiative, and lead the way towards true equity in our open space ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of these panelists who have agreed to testify at the beginning of the hearing. We will now move on to testimony from the Parks Department. At this point, I will announce all the following panelists from the Parks Department appearing today include Commissioner Sue Donahue, Mark Vogt, Deputy Commissioner, Chief Operating Officer, David Saron, Assistant Commissioner for Planning and Development, Alex Butler, Director of the Parks Inspection Program, and Matt Jury, Director of Government Relations. At this time, I'll administer the affirmation to each representative of the administration. I'll call on each of you individually for a response. So at this point, please raise your right hands. Thank you very much. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Commissioner Donahue?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Vogt?
I do.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner Saron?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Butler?
I do.
Thank you. And Director Jury?
I do.
Thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to invite Commissioner Donahue to present her testimony.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair Krishnan and members of the Parks Committee. My name is Sue Donahue, Commissioner of the Department of Parks and Recreation. And as you've heard, I'm joined by members of our senior team here at the Parks Department, including Mark Vogt, our Deputy Commissioner and Chief Operating Officer, David Saron, our Assistant Commissioner for Planning and Development, Alex Butler, our Director of the Parks Inspection Program, and Matt Drury, our Director of Government Relations. We are very pleased to be here today to discuss equity as it relates to our city parks and open spaces, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you'll hear, equity is a centrally vital principle that informs all of our strategic and operational decisions, and we thank the Council for convening this important hearing. It's especially fitting, as Heather noted, that this hearing is being held on Earth Day, a time when we commemorate the creation of the modern environmental movement and recognize the importance of working together to protect our planet. New York City Parks is the primary steward of over 30,000 acres of city park land, 14% of New York City's land mass, including 10,000 acres of natural areas. We oversee thousands of individual properties, including parks, playgrounds, community gardens, and beaches, all of which, as we know, are incredibly important spaces for New Yorkers and their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. From our agency's perspective, the concept of equity is simple. It's every New Yorker being treated fairly when it comes to their access to parks and open space and regarding the resources being allocated to those spaces. Our agency prioritizes equity in every aspect of our strategic efforts, and well over $500 million has been invested in recent years into several major capital and expense initiatives dedicated to improving park equity. We also utilize a data-driven approach regarding resource allocation and have developed creative strategies to increase access to park and parkland amenities across the city. The agency continues to advance its major equity efforts, most notably the Community Parks Initiative, which has already directed over $300 million in capital reconstruction funds for parks in neighborhoods that had seen perpetual underinvestment for decades. Historically, not all New Yorkers have enjoyed equal access to parks and open space, and we're dedicated to doing everything we can to change that. The agency is always exploring creative approaches that will increase access to green and open space for neighborhoods that are underserved, which can happen in a variety of fashions. We use open space ratios and walk to park metrics to guide our planning efforts and identify neighborhoods that are in the greatest need of green space. We have partnered with other city agencies, such as the Department of Education and the New York City Housing Authority, to improve and increase access to some of their recreational spaces for the public through the Schoolyards to Playgrounds program or various NYCC campus improvements. Vacant and underutilized land is extremely scarce in New York City, and the complexity and duration of the city's land use review process for each parcel often discourages property owners who might otherwise be willing to sell to the city. However, we remain dedicated to exploring every opportunity to add new sites to our portfolio and have successfully done so in recent years, including Brookfield Park in Staten Island, Chelsea Green in Manhattan, and additional portions of Bushwick Inlet Park in Brooklyn. Our agency is laser focused on making our parks the best they can be, and we are privileged and blessed to have the support of New Yorkers all over the city, many of whom have formed local park groups that help provide tremendous added value to our parks, providing stewardship and volunteer care, as well as programming that helps activate our parks in vibrant and fun ways for everyone to enjoy. Our Partnerships for Parks team, which is a unique joint program with the City Parks Foundation, as Heather recently described, cultivates and supports a growing network of local grassroots groups of all sizes. Over 500 community groups and more than 25,000 volunteers. These New Yorkers care for, advocate for, and activate parks, particularly in high-need areas. and they engage an immense array of individuals, along with larger organizations and businesses in this important effort. Our Partnerships for Parks team provides a wide range of resources to local groups that care for parks, including workshops and coaching, supplies and materials, small grants, and on-the-ground logistical support to make sure these groups meet their potential, which ensures our parks can meet their potential as well. Our commitment to equity also shapes our daily maintenance efforts, as we are dedicated to keeping all of our parks and playgrounds in the best condition possible. Over the years, we are proud to have consistently exceeded our performance indicator targets in the Mayor's Management Report for overall park condition and overall park cleanliness, even in the face of tremendous challenges. To help make that a reality, our staff uses a variety of tools and approaches to ensure that all of our properties are getting the resources they need in a fair and equitable manner. Firstly, I have to recognize the incredible hard work of our dedicated park staff, who are responsible for the maintenance of our green spaces. There are a wide variety of maintenance staff roles, including full-time year-round staff, seasonal staff, as well as positions filled through our Parks Opportunity Program, which is administered in coordination with our fellow city agency, the Human Resources Administration. Some of our maintenance staff serve on fixed post crews who primarily maintain a given park or playground, along with its comfort station and other amenities. Others work as part of mobile crews, cleaning parks and playgrounds along a pre-assigned route, traveling from site to site as a team. On a daily basis, our park workers are able to observe conditions in the spaces they care for, address issues as they arise, and report serious concerns to their supervisors. Turning to the topic of the legislation being formally heard today, we actively monitor and inspect the condition of our parks in several ways, including the Parks Inspection Program, or PIP, which is independently administered by our Operations and Management Planning, or OMP division. PIP is a detailed, objective quality assurance program, which is conducted independently from the agency's maintenance and operations staff. For close to 4 decades, PIP has helped to ensure that our parks are well maintained and welcoming for New Yorkers and visitors alike. Created in 1984, PIP initially focused on small parks and playgrounds, but has expanded and evolved over the years, growing to become comprehensive and flexible enough to apply to all varieties of park properties, from small sitting areas to our largest wooded areas. The ratings developed by this rigorous and independent inspection program are a valuable management tool. In addition to 311 reports, day-to-day monitoring by our maintenance staff, and regular inspections conducted by our park supervisors. In line with our agency's standing commitment to transparency, historic PIP inspection details for individual parks are available on our public website, in addition to citywide and borough performance data. More detailed line item inspection data is also available on the New York City Open Data portal. Lastly, our PIP inspection results serve as the source data that helps inform our key maintenance indicators in park section of the Mayor's Management Report, which is updated biannually and available online. We would welcome the opportunity to discuss the legislation further with the Council alongside a more expansive briefing on our inspection program. The COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing struggle for racial justice have brought many important related social issues to the forefront of public dialogue, including the importance of access to parks and open space. In New York City, parks have always been our backyards, but in the past 2 years, they became our everything. Our classrooms, our gyms, our places of quiet reflection, and our spaces to safely reconnect with friends and family. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, many parks properties and facilities served a direct operational role in public health efforts, including testing, vaccination, and food distribution. New York City Parks has risen to the challenge during the pandemic, and it has strengthened our commitment to care for all of the parks in our system, especially those in neighborhoods identified by the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity in response to the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. As you've heard today, a data-driven approach to fairness and equity informs and shapes every aspect of our strategic and operational decision-making. The condition and cleanliness of our parks is a top priority for this agency, and we've worked to make sure those resources are distributed in a strategic and thoughtful manner. Of course, we are constantly looking for opportunities to improve our practices and protocols and look forward to working with the council as we continue to care for our city's park system to benefit all New Yorkers. I would like to thank the council for giving us the opportunity to discuss this topic today. After our panel convenes, our staff will continue to watch the public's testimony via the council's live stream. But first, my colleagues and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I'll now turn it to Chair Krishnan for his questions.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony. We really appreciate hearing your perspective on the Parks Department. And thank you to all the great work of all our Parks employee staff that keep our parks running every day. We have just a few questions, and I also want to acknowledge that Councilmember Ressler has joined as well. Commissioner, my first question is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic encouraged the Parks Department to think about how the city can add more open and green space or build more parks in neighborhoods that currently lack quality access to open space?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, for this question. As we've discussed, and I think you're aware, the Parks Department has a long history of innovative and thoughtful approaches to expanding access to open space, whether it be through our schoolyards to playgrounds program, whether it be through our community parks initiative, whether it be through our Parks Without Borders initiative, which was about just opening up parks and making them more welcoming and accessible. We think about plazas, we think about green streets, we think about greenways. We're really anxious to move forward on opportunities to expand access and to greenways across the city. We are constantly looking for innovative approaches to adding and increasing access to our green spaces. We know how important it is, and we're always looking at innovative approaches.
Thank you. And I am heartened to hear also the more expansive view of parks as well. We've talked before, you've come and visited 34th Avenue or Open Street in Jackson Heights. The vital role it's played for us during the pandemic, and the importance of thinking about that as park space as well, and how we bring more green to 34th Avenue. So I appreciate that of the parks as well. What is the current total budget allocation for parks maintenance citywide, and how does that compare to the prior 3 fiscal years?
So in terms of budget, just bear with me one sec. So our total budget for park maintenance citywide is $430 million. This is larger than the last 3 fiscal years, but it does include $70 million of federal stimulus funding that was related to COVID.
And how does that compare to the prior 3 fiscal years?
It's $430 million today. FY21, it was $330 million. FY20, it was $380 million. And FY19, it was $350 million.
Thank you. And we had our budget hearing. We'll have another one coming up as well. But I would like to ask a bit about, as we mentioned before, $1 billion or 1% for parks is crucial, and restoring funding we've lost over the years. So since our last hearing as well, I'd like to ask about what is the agency's commitment to securing the stated promise by the mayor of 1% for parks, and has there been more reflection by you, by the Parks Department, by the administration on how we get to that goal?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, and appreciate the question. As always, we are looking for ways that we can add resources, work with our partner agencies to continue to support the Parks Department and our efforts. As we all know, the city is coming out of a very challenging time with COVID, and we are continuing, ongoing discussions with City Hall. This is an administration that's very committed. We know is very committed to parks and open space and equity in the city. So those conversations are ongoing.
Thank you. And we look forward to hearing in the executive budget that comes out soon, where how the administration intends to fulfill its promise. We have a hearing on equity today, but achieving 1% for parks or $1 billion is a crucial part of the fight for equity. As we've already heard from testimony from the public as well, the 1% of the budget of $1 billion for parks would actually be helping so many communities that don't have access to green and park space. And from an equity standpoint, when we think about the lack of resource, when we think about the divestment from parks over decades, I could not think of a more powerful and effective way to address the need for equity and parks equity than to increase our parks budget to 1% or $1 billion. My next question is, what, if any, parks under the department's jurisdiction that operate with a Conservancy agreement are able to keep any portion of revenue earned from concessions operating within their boundaries? Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. 12 of our licensed partners keep some or all of the revenue earned from concessions.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And we have 20, that's of 25 groups that operate under a license agreement with the city.
And so 12 overall, it's 12 out of 20?
25 who have an operating agreement or a license agreement with the city. 12 of those keep some or all of the concession earned from revenue.
Okay.
Revenue earned from concession, sorry.
Got it. And do you have a more specific sense of the percentage that's kept towards of concession revenue when you say some to all with those 12 parks? How does it break down in terms of how much roughly, what's the range of percentage, and how many are able to keep all, how many are able to keep some?
It's a wide variety, but it's generally either 50% of the concession revenue or 100% is the range.
Okay. And how many are able to keep 100% of the revenue?
Of that 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are able to keep all.
7 are able to keep all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. And I think I noted this before as well, but just wanted to note again that Councilmember Ressler has joined our hearing as well earlier. According to the Center for an Urban Futures report on parks infrastructure, the Parks Department had a staff of over 11,642 in the 1970s at the height of the fiscal crisis. What is the current full and part-time maintenance workforce?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, for the question. So for our maintenance and operations workforce, year-round staffing is 2,300, seasonal staffing is 5,000 for a total of 7,300 M&O staffing. And then in addition to that, we have additional administrative and support staff. So kind of other staffing that supports that the total number then goes to 9,900. But strictly M&O staffing, that total is 7,300.
And what is this number broken down by borough or by park district?
Do you want me to list by each borough?
By borough would be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, so for the Bronx, it's 865. Brooklyn, it's 1,058. Manhattan, it's 872. Queens, it's 1,010. Staten Island is 374. And then we have citywide services that provide trades and support staff throughout the borough. That's another 226. We have fleet support services that are part of our maintenance and operation team. That's 77. And then, of course, our forestry staff, which is vitally important in terms of maintaining our parks. That's another 178 individuals.
Thank you. And what has been the trend over the last few budget cycles in terms of the increase of the maintenance workforce and the distribution?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, for the question. The trend has stayed pretty consistent. We did certainly during COVID, as across the city, there were such budget challenges. There was certainly a decrease during COVID where we didn't have seasonal staffing, but in general, it's stayed pretty consistent over time.
And what would be the optimal number of full-time staff, in your opinion, for the Parks Department?
I don't really have an optimal number that I would quote. I would say that we make really good use of the resources that we have, and our team works really hard to provide coverage across the boroughs and, kind of in an innovative and creative way as possible.
Well, I mean, presumably it would be helpful to have more, given the amount of maintenance work that's needed for our staff. So if you don't have an optimal number, would you be able to say what factors in particular would help determine what that optimal number is and how we get there?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan. I appreciate the question. I mean, we are always looking at, as I said, we spend a whole lot of time in terms of our PIP ratings. That's something that we utilize to inform our maintenance decisions and strategies. So we're constantly looking at how we're allocating staffing, where we need to be deploying staffing for the best effect in the optimal maintenance across the city. So we do, depending on staff, depending on some of our PIP ratings, we will shift staffing slightly. We'll add training. We'll deploy crews in certain areas. We also, one of the things that we do that's been very effective, we have hotspot crews that we deploy across the city, 100 different areas that we've identified that are highly utilize, say, barbecue areas or areas with bandshell and music. So we definitely look to very strategically place our employees where they're most needed across the boroughs.
And, I think one thing is, and put simply too, when we talk about a budget increase for parks and $1 billion for parks, not just being an parks equity issue, it's also a workers issue too, right? I think it's so many, as we reviewed at the last budget hearing, there's so many seasonal workers and otherwise in the city cleanup corps who are affected by the proposed cuts in the preliminary budget to the Parks Department, who would be affected by an increase in the budget. So would you agree that an increase in the budget for parks to $1 billion would significantly help ensure that we can expand the parks workforce, that we can provide worker stability?
We absolutely support the stability for our workers, absolutely. And it's an important aspect of what we do. We spend a whole lot of time with I mentioned in my testimony, our Parks Opportunity Program, spend a whole lot of time training, providing resources and assistance for our park workers, especially entry-level workers. So we are always looking to provide good opportunities and a good workforce and workplace for our employees, absolutely.
And I do think increasing the budget would be a crucial piece of that as well. So, I think it's important that we see the fight for 1%, as I said before, as both from an equity standpoint as well as a workers' justice standpoint. And I know that we've had plenty of testimony before from parks workers and DC 37 staff about how crucial it is too. I want to turn to a couple questions about parks equity as well. How many private organizations, whether they are referred to as conservancies or alliances, I think you already answered this, but we can do it again, currently maintain and operate a Department of Parks pursuant to an agreement or contract with the department? Is that 25?
Yes, that would be 25.
Mm-hmm. And what is the number of friends of groups and other volunteer type groups that the Parks Department interacts with?
That's in the hundreds, Chair Krishnan. It's an incredibly important aspect, and really something that we are so blessed to have be part of the park system is the dedicated volunteers and park organizations. As I said, our Partnerships for Parks group alone works with over 500 community-based organizations. We at the Parks Department, a big part of what we do is look to encourage stewardship and caring for our park system in all forms. And I'm biased, but I believe that volunteerism helps both sides. It helps the Parks Department, and it's a wonderful thing for people to get out and volunteer in their parks. So we have been really fortunate over the years. As I said, Partnerships for Parks works with over 500 groups and over 25,000 volunteers. So people come out and help support their parks. And for us, it's both, you don't have to be part of a formal group. We love people to just come out. We encourage people to clean up after themselves, all those things. Stewardship is incredibly important to us. So, you know, whether it be a really small friends of group, a local organization, an individual volunteer, it's all really important part of helping to support and steward this incredible park system.
And that's impressive to hear the hundreds of volunteer and friends groups too, and really a testament to how many communities, how beloved parks are to so many communities. You know, one of the things that brings to my mind, especially in a community like Elmhurst and Jackson Heights, where we've often had to take care of our public spaces, whether parks or plazas, on our own with, you know, they've been, I used the example in the plaza context of Diversity Plaza, that when it was installed by the Bloomberg administration, we had done work over years as a volunteer group to really bring in more resources with no support from the city. And so one of the biggest concerns is, you know, when you have the friend groups or volunteer groups, oftentimes the burden they bear is so high with little support and infrastructure from city agencies. And so it's not sustainable as a model. And so when we think about expanding green space and parks, especially in low-income communities of color, that's going to come up over and over again. These are communities that don't have the ability to create and fully fund conservancies or other private-public partnerships, and really need, and that's why it's so important to have public funding, because our communities, from an equity standpoint, depend on it. Has there been any thought by the Parks Department as to how to better assist and support all of the volunteer and friends group who bear so much of the burden of taking care of our parks?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, and such an important question, and one that we do think a great deal about. And it's really the whole reason for being of our Partnerships for Parks division. What they do is they go out and they provide tools, they provide workshops here's how to help inform people about how you advocate, for funding from your local elected officials. They help support volunteer efforts. They provide everything from tools to plans to it's a really important way that we help support those grassroots and local organizations on the ground. And it's through Partnerships for Parks that we have these incredible and extensive relationships with parks groups all across the city. So it's very much, and it's as you heard from Heather, it's a partnership with the City Parks Foundation, but our Partnerships for Parks division is certainly the way that we help to encourage and support local grassroots organizations.
Mm-hmm. And could you see, again, budget increases to 1% or $1 billion for parks being a crucial part of making sure that the Parks Department has the resources to support many of the friends groups and volunteer groups that run the parks and take care of the parks on their own?
As commissioner of the agency, we're always looking to expand access to resources, absolutely. And I appreciate the council's interest and support of these efforts. We get so much done. It's about partnership. It's about the local community groups, is working with our elected officials and supporting the park system.
And, I want to just emphasize that point again, too, because I do feel like that is a crucial part of when we think about expanding public funding for parks. And, there are as I said before, there are public-private partnerships that do well, that are able to maintain their parks, but that shouldn't be a reason to retreat from public funding and parks funding, because really it's the public dollars that help support so many of our volunteer groups that are otherwise overburdened. I hear so much from constituents in my community too that take care of our parks and public spaces, the shoestring budgets they're on, and how difficult it is for them as volunteers to make it work. So I do think it's critical the Parks Department maintains a focus on this as an equity point. From an equity standpoint as well, I do want to go through a few pieces of data that our Parks Committee did such a great job putting together, and that we hope to also publicize further as well. But in the briefing papers before this hearing, I just want to point attention to a couple different excellent maps that really showcase the disparities. When we talk about equity and we talk about how that's been exacerbated by COVID, for example, on page 16, there's a map that shows park acreage per 100,000 residents that exist in each zip code throughout New York City. And the zip codes are colored in varying shades of green. Darker areas indicate greater amounts of park acreage compared to lighter shaded areas on page 16. And on top of that, there's an overlay of purple outlines that show the zip codes in the bottom 25% of park access in the city. And so in other words, what you really see, and park access is defined as the amount of functional park acreage available to a resident within a 10-minute walk. And what you see is while each overall, the overlay between the areas that have park access and within 10 minutes, while each borough has at least one zip code in the bottom 25% of park access, the cluster of zip codes in Queens really stand out in having some of the least amount of park acreage that's accessible, and that includes Elmhurst and Jackson Heights. And the map powerfully shows how this disparity is portrayed and how it particularly impacts Queens especially. I also want to take a look at the page 17, the COVID death rate map. And what you see is the map here, which again shows the COVID death rates per 100,000 people that exist in each zip code throughout the city. The zip codes are colored in varying shades of blue. Darker areas indicate higher COVID death rates compared to lighter shaded areas. There's an overlay of a red outline that indicates the zip code, whether the zip code is in the bottom 25% of park access. So in other words, you have a map showing the distribution of COVID death rates, and then a red outline to show how those areas of death rates match up to bottom 25% of park access. And you see that several zip codes with higher numbers of COVID death rates are also in the bottom 25% of park access. For example, Jackson Heights has the 16th highest COVID death rate at 699 deaths per 100,000, and the 6th lowest park access at 5 acres per 100,000 residents. On page 18, we also have a map here that shows median household income and also how it's overlay of how it compares to park access in the bottom 25%. So the colors, again, the dark blue shows a higher median income compared to a lighter shade of blue, which shows lower income. And the red outline shows, again, which areas are in the bottom 25% of park access in the city. And what you see, again, is that, for example, areas that are a lighter shade of blue and outlined in red have a lower median household income, are in the bottom 25% of parks. So you're seeing the overlay between household income and park access. And you see, for example, that Morris Heights, Mount Hope, and University Heights in the Bronx has a median household income of $29,000, give or take, and access to 22.8 acres per 100,000 residents. Finally, on page 19, we see a map of the same distribution, but by race and communities based on percentage of non-Hispanic white residents in each zip code, and then an overlay of which ones are in the bottom 25% of park access. And what you see again is that, for example, 3.7% of the residents in East Flatbush are non-Hispanic white. So roughly 96% Black and brown community, and they have access to 6.8 acres of parkland per 100,000 residents. So however you look at these maps, by household income, by race, by COVID death rates, you see there is a clear correlation or clear overlap between these factors and communities with lower income, communities of color, communities with high COVID rates. And there are maps as well in the briefing papers that follow or charts on pages 22 and 21 that further combine all these variables together too. But I want to take those as a snapshot and just to say, you know, I think these maps powerfully show from our Council's Parks Committee the inequities in our system by any of these measures. And coming out of this pandemic, I'd love to hear a bit from you on behalf of the Parks Department. How does the Parks Department envision addressing these inequities when you look at income, when you look at race, when you look at COVID? What ways can programs be prioritized to address communities that have some of the starkest disparities, whether it's East Flatbush, whether it's the Bronx, or whether it's Queens?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, for the question and for all the maps and illuminating information. As you know, in a densely populated city like New York, it can be really challenging to add green space. And that's why we at the Parks Department are always looking at innovative ways that we can utilize existing open spaces. As I talked about in my testimony, whether it be partnering with the Department of Education on schoolyards. So the Schoolyards to Playgrounds initiative, it's a way to open up access to open space that heretofore wasn't available maybe to the community or the public. Or working with NYCHA and looking at NYCHA campuses. It's not parkland necessarily, but it's a way to provide more access to open space. Through our Community Parks initiative, where we're investing millions of dollars, that investment and analysis was based on looking at under-resourced areas, poverty rates. Where we targeted those investments was based on analysis, and it was very data-driven to look at addressing equity issues and gaps. We are looking at all of the weapons in our arsenal, if you will, whether that be where we plant trees to green, where we're looking at expanding access to greenways so that people can have access to a larger park. We're being thoughtful about all aspects of both open space under our purview and not under our purview. We think about our forested areas, our natural areas, our trail system. There are many different avenues by which we are looking to add to be innovative with adding to and creating open space, but greening existing space. And as you know, we look at the entries to parks. I talked about the Parks Without Borders initiative, opening up our parks, making them more accessible and friendly. So really in every aspect, every angle that we're looking at open space, we're looking to do that as equitably and make them as welcoming and accessible as possible.
Well, I appreciate that, and I also look forward to us working together on those issues. And 2 points you mentioned in particular, as a member of the Education Committee and also a public school parent, I think the issue of looking at schoolyards to playground conversions is so crucial, not just from a creating more park space, but also from an education standpoint. It's a way to make sure our students have opportunities for physical activity, to get out more, and really shift the focus of education away from just Common Core subjects and make for a more well-rounded education. Same thing with NYCHA. As a housing lawyer, I've seen too often representing NYCHA tenants, the pervasive lead paint in buildings, the lack of repairs by NYCHA, while at the same time, the playgrounds are in utter disrepair too. And so the notions of focusing on our public schools and our public housing, I think is crucial. Speaking about the Community Parks Initiative, just a few more questions from my end. How have the projects that are being developed under the Community Parks Initiative and the Anchor Parks Initiative been affected by the proposed FY23 parks budget?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, for the question. And I'm pleased to say that the Community Parks Initiative has not been at all impacted by the present budget. We are on track with our as part of the initial CPI program. The city invested $318 million to complete capital reconstruction on 67 different parks. 64 of 67 are complete. And then last year, $500 million in baseline capital funding was allocated, $50 million a year to complete renovations at 10 sites per year for the next 10 years. That has not been impacted at all. None of that, the CPI initiatives have been impacted at all by the budget.
And how many projects are fully funded under these initiatives and currently in construction?
So as I said, we have 64 of 67 are complete. The construction is complete. We have one site that's in construction and 2 sites that are in procurement. So of those 67 original that we announced, 64 out of the 67 are done. 1 is in construction, 2 sites are in procurement. And then as of the new baseline funding that was allocated in fall of 21. We've got 10 sites that are moving forward. Those 10 sites were announced in fall of 21, and 3 projects have started design thus far with community input meetings, and the remaining 7 projects are expected to start design by this year, mid 2022.
Thank you. And this turning to a couple questions about the Parks Inspection Program. Does the Parks Department reallocate or increase maintenance resources when a specific park or playground does not meet the PIP inspection criteria?
Thank you for the question, Chair Krishnan. I appreciate it. And we're always happy to talk about our parks inspection program. We use multiple indicators when making decisions about how we allocate resources. That includes PIP cleanliness ratings, 311 reports, and staff observations. So we will at times reallocate staffing as needed. If we see problems recurring from the PIP inspections, we'll go in and we'll do additional training, we'll put additional focus on certain areas, but we use multiple different indicators to make these decisions.
And how did COVID affect the PIP process?
Thank you for the question. And thankfully, it did not negatively impact the process. I'm so proud of our parks workers, both our PIP inspectors and our parks just staff in general who were out all through COVID, and certainly were essential to the city's recovery from the pandemic. But in the last 2 years, we've completed over 6,000 inspections, and that did not change under COVID. Our folks were still able to be out conducting their inspections and did not change with COVID.
Thank you. And my 2 questions. Local Law 98 of 2015 required that the Parks report on maintenance resources, required that the Parks Department report on maintenance resources allocated to various park properties. Did the most recent report highlight any areas of the city where park resources and maintenance suffered the most?
Thank you for that question. I do not believe that it did identify the areas where parks suffered the most, but I'm going to throw the question over to my COO and Deputy Commissioner Mark Folk to answer that.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good morning, Chair Krishnan. Good, nice to see you again. The Local Law 97 report that you referenced did not show any discrepancies or impacts of COVID, in that it is a report that reports after the fact based upon where staff spent their time doing tasks. So, and as the Commissioner has repeatedly noted in this hearing, our resources are allocated based upon need. So the Local Law 97 report again reports after the end of the fiscal year on where the resources were allocated based upon need.
And in the Parks Inspection Program, how many inspections were performed again in 2020 compared to 2019?
Mark, I'm going to answer as 6,000 each year, right? 6,000 inspections a year.
And my final question is, the council administration restored and added a total of 80 million in Playfair funding for in the fiscal year. Can you specify how that funding is being allocated for inspection maintenance practices? How many positions have been filled to date with those funds? How many positions remain to be filled, and what is the timeline to fill those positions?
Thank you, Chair Krishnan, for the question. And, I do want to point out that funding provided amazing value for the Parks Department throughout the city. So it's very much appreciated. The distribution of Playfair individuals, we had 100 CPWs and 50 gardeners, and they have been hired. That has been consistent throughout. The way they were distributed was based on a number of underperforming sites in each borough as well, determined by PIP ratings for the CPWs and the number of horticultural areas for the gardeners. So they've all been hired, they were distributed, and they have been incredibly valuable throughout the system.
Thank you. No further questions from my end, and I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator, Chris. And I want to thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony and for answering all of my questions, and for now answering the committee's questions as well from my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. At this point, I will now call on other council members to ask their questions in the order that they have used the Zoom raise hand function. Council members, if you'd like to ask a question, just a reminder, please use the Zoom raise hand function, and you'll be limited in 5 minutes to your question and answer period. The Sergeant at Arms will keep a timer and let you know when your time is up. You should begin once I've called on you and the Sergeant hasn't given you the go ahead to begin. We will first hear from Council Member Narcisse, followed by Council Members Dinowitz, followed by Council Member Kagan.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner and staff and everyone. Thank you. The pandemic caused a severe loss of up to park maintenance hours and lost horticultural hours. According to report, many trees, shrubs, and plants were unplanted and lawns were untrimmed. How close is park to catching up with the maintenance losses caused by the pandemic? What are the long-term maintenance effects of any?
Thank you, Councilmember Narcisse, for the question. We did certainly suffer during the height of the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, we did have a loss to our seasonal plan during 2020, but that seasonal plan was reinstituted coming out of COVID. So we had it for last summer. We feel like we have very much recovered from the challenges during that period and are able to, and using our PIP inspections and using the resources at our disposal, are very much able to maintain the park system.
Okay. In staffing, we were talking about, is apparently how many that you have that cover Brooklyn? I think it's 800 some.
For Brooklyn, it's 1,058.
Oh, 1,058. So if I echo on Moya, the park in Canarsie specifically, I know minis, but since she mentioned about Canarsie Park, is there any reason that the park's lapidated like this? Like why we have so many staff and we have the money in the budget sometimes? And I know we've been having a little slowdown bringing the budget up, but what happened? I'm sure it's not only Canarsie Park, and I have witnessed it too myself personally. What's the problem that the parks are so bad?
Thank you, Councilmember Narcisse. I'm sorry to hear in terms of that park is so bad. Our numbers don't show that there is a significant diminution in service in that area, but it's certainly something that we will look at and have the borough look at specifically for Canarsie Park.
Yeah, because one of the things that I realized in especially Canarsie Park, Prosper Park, those are utilized by people everywhere. So the staffing been short, especially around piers where activity by the waters and in Queens as well. There's requirement, I mean, for me to think that in the summertime around where people are picnicking, we should have an increase in staffing to maintain those parks, especially in the most needed area. We don't even have enough footage, square footage, not square footage, miles, whatever the measurement, the metrics that you use per capita, we don't have enough square open for the people to be at the park. So the least that we can do is to maintain the parks, to maintain them clean. I have another question about the schoolyards. Are there any plans to expand on the city schoolyards to playground projects?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. It's absolutely something that we would love to entertain and move forward. As with all things, it involves resources and capital dollars to be committed, but it's absolutely something that we want to talk with our sister agencies and determine a way forward.
Another question. I don't know about so many parks, but one of the things that I witnessed in Marine Park and Salt Marsh, right across from Marine Park, the bridge is falling apart. Is something that brought up to your attention? Because that's dangerous too. It's a safety issue. So I'm looking forward to see what we can do with that.
Thank you, Council Member. I appreciate that. We will note it and absolutely take a look at it for sure.
Okay, I appreciate your time, and like the chair mentioned, this is a public health issue for me. It's very important that we maintain all the parks around the city, especially in the high-risk area. We saw what happened. A lot of folks don't have no backyard. They don't have anything but the park for open space for family. And myself personally, there's time that I had to use my parks for my children to raise them. So it is important for us to have our park well maintained. So whatever we can do, like the chair mentioned, we want to increase the budget. It is important. It is the time more than ever. COVID has highlighted the problems that we face in our community. So thank you for your help. And I'm looking forward to make the city a place where we can live, work, and enjoy our parks. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Councilmember Dinowitz, followed by Councilmember Kagan.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Happy Earth Day, everyone. Chag Sameach. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Donahue. At first, I want to thank you. You have a great staff. You have great parks maintenance workers in the Parks Department. You're always very responsive to the needs we have in District 11. I know you won't exactly say it, but we all know the Parks Department needs more resources. So I'm looking forward to working together to making sure you get the support you need so that our parks and communities get the care and attention and support that we deserve. So I've been hearing this word access a lot, accessing our parks, that's how important it is. When I hear access and accessibility, I think access for everybody. So accessibility, ADA compliance, Americans with Disability Act compliance, it's vital to ensuring equity and that everyone has the ability to enjoy our parks. So, I think about our playgrounds, like our children may have a disability. Maybe a kid's a grandparent wants to play with them on the jungle gym area. There are no ramps. Maybe a kid's older brother or sister has a sports injury. Not to mention, we have children with autism spectrum disorder or a vision or hearing disability. We want to ensure everyone can access our parks, regardless of their permanent or temporary disability, their visible or invisible disability. So can you share with us what % of our playgrounds have inclusive elements, like ADA compliant swings and ramps, and how that compares across the borough?
Thank you, Councilmember Dinowitz, and I so appreciate the question, and we could not agree with you more. When we talk about access, it's not only welcoming spaces and spaces that people feel comfortable going into, whether that be our comfort stations, whether that be our landscapes, but absolutely in terms of ADA access and making places as available to as many as people as possible. I do not, I will tell you, have the exact number for you, but I will absolutely follow up in terms of the number of ADA accessible playgrounds in the borough or across the borough. I'm happy to follow up on that.
Right, and there are different ADA elements, including wheelchair accessible comfort stations, ramps on the jungle gym areas, swings, sensory activities for people with different types of disabilities. And so, have the pandemic era cuts? I mean, I am assuming that you're working towards making all of our play spaces ADA compliant and welcoming. How is the cuts, these budget cuts and pandemic era cuts, affected your plan to make our playgrounds ADA accessible?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Dinowitz. And luckily, the cuts have not impacted our plans to make our playgrounds and play spaces accessible. We have a healthy capital budget, and it's something that we look at in all of our designs. And that has not changed, and that continues to be at the forefront of our efforts to design and renovate our parks. I just 2 weeks ago was in Bronx Park, and we opened the Waring Playground in Bronx Park, and it's an absolutely wonderful example. It had not only wheelchair accessible swings, ramps to access the playground. It had Braille, all different sensory type of amenities for kids of all different abilities. So it's
love to hear it.
Yeah, it's a prime example of the work that we're doing. We have wonderful designers that we work with in-house and that we partner with, and accessibility is at the forefront of our thinking. Absolutely.
So I'm certainly looking forward to seeing that breakdown of all the different elements currently in our playgrounds, and especially how it compares across the boroughs. One other question on this is, conservancies were mentioned before, Conservancy and Friends of Group. Do we see, this is one other piece of information I'm going to assume you don't have, but I'm interested in is, do we see in parks with Friends of Groups and Conservancies that they have more ADA compliant components than strictly city-run parks? And my last question, it's very clear that parks with Conservancies, these Friends of Groups, they look nicer, they get more attention. They're better for the community. Like Councilmember Narcisse, I'm one of those parents who was raising my kids in our parks. So on your website, I see you have these community parks initiative. You're building better partnerships with communities. But is there proactive outreach done to help create these groups, specifically in communities, of color, communities without these groups, for instance, working with the local council member or working with CBOs or schools to help create those groups from the ground up? Is there any outreach done like that?
So thank you, Councilmember Dinowitz, for your question. And I'm going to just address the first question first, which is parks with Friends of Groups or Conservancies or alliances attached to them do not have more ADA accessible or less ADA accessible equipment. Most of the restoration, the capital work is done by the Parks Department, not typically through a Friends group. And so the answer would be no. There is no differential between having a Friends group and having more ADA accessible. As I said, the renovation, the capital construction is generally done by the Parks Department, and we are looking at writ large for all of our park spaces, is making sure that there is, we're thinking about accessibility across the board. And then
right, but just sometimes, and I just mentioned that sometimes these Friends group or Conservancies may be able to lobby or advocate for things more than the parks without those groups. That's why I'm interested in kind of seeing that comparison, understanding they don't directly do the capital work, but their advocacy may impact which parks do have that compliance. So that's why I'm really interested in seeing that.
Yeah, but I would just state that, we also are following this ADA regulations with any renovation that we do. There are standards that we are held to. So not only are we very much interested in and actively looking at that throughout our design, we're also, any renovation is going to have ADA standards that we're adhering to. So that's across the board, across the park system, we're looking at that. And then in terms of your question about you're asking about, so in terms of reaching out to groups and encouraging Friends of Groups, I would say, yes, absolutely. That's a big part of what our Partnerships for Parks organization does, is they're working with grassroots, very local on the ground organizations to help encourage stewardship, to help encourage volunteerism. We have found that it's that kind of local support for volunteers that lends itself to helping to create a network, helping to create Friends groups around these parks. And so that's something we're actively engaged in. As I said, we have over 500 community groups and 25,000 volunteers that we engage across the park system. And we're really, really fortunate in parks. It has a history of really active volunteer engagement and supporting parks. And that's something that we cherish and something that we look to absolutely support and augment.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Councilmember Kagan with questions.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much, Chair Krishnan. A very good example for each one of us to start with public testimony. not to end with public testimony, so everybody will hear what public has to say. Thank you so much for your leadership, and thank you, Commissioner Donahue. Thank you for coming to Blessing of the Rights in Coney Island. Thank you very much, and agreeing to work to restore our famous, legendary, landmark Coney Island boardwalk, which definitely needs to be fixed and restored. My question is not about expenses, but about resources and revenues part. Because I know that for any project, you clearly need more money all the time. You mentioned it already. So I have many ideas. Some of them I'm trying to put as a legislation, but some of them could be done just on the park side from parks without even any kind of legislation. For example, I always talk that why in Florida we have concession kiosks on beaches. We don't have anything like this in New York City. And anybody who is any beach goer who goes to beach should bring everything with herself or himself. Like I'm prime example, every time I need to go there, I need to bring everything with myself. Why we cannot use private businesses and to offer this will be new service to beach goers and new revenues to Parks Department, because it's a permits, sales tax, income tax, jobs, etc. Another idea is like, if it's good for Central Park Conservancy to charge money for memorial plaques on benches, we have so many benches, not just on Coney Island Boardwalk, but in every playground, in every park, so many benches. Is it even possible to establish such a program so people who wanted to put memorial plaque on some kind of bench can pay some kind of fee to Department of Parks and get the permission and to put this plaque like it's happening already in Central Park. I saw it, I have pictures, can send it to you. Another idea, when I go on the boardwalk and I see a lot of stands, you know, like graffiti on them, etc. Why not to use existing infrastructure of Parks Department, like comfort stations, for example, or any kind of like booth or stands like I saw on the boardwalk with graffiti for paid advertising. That's another revenue source. Like if you need a special permit or special legislation, I would be glad to introduce, but that's another opportunity to get revenues. Because, for example, it's beach season is coming, and again, lifeguards will leave at 6 p.m., and nobody who works in New York City will not be able to swim at 6:30 p.m. That's money for lifeguards, money to even like to maintain these comfort stations themselves, itself. So what do you think about all of this idea?
Thank you, Councilmember Kagan, and I appreciate your thinking and appreciate all of the good ideas. It's really helpful to us. I'm going to luckily we have our expert in concessions, David Cerrone, is on the phone to just talk about concessions on beaches, can respond to that. We do have at the Parks Department in terms of your adopt a park or adopt a playground idea, there is that opportunity. We do make that available. And so we can absolutely get you information about that. That's something that people can do in places outside of Central Park, certainly. And then in terms of paid advertising, that is something that, there are a lot of rules and regulations around and that we're very careful about. There's an approval process. We don't want our parks and open spaces become overly commercialized, and there are rules in terms of, public facing assets in parks and what can be advertised and not advertised. So while we do, have certain sponsorship opportunities and things like that, there is a whole process just in terms of what can be posted and displayed in parks. Public design issues and things like that. So we try and be, as stewards of this incredible public property, try and be very careful about advertising and what is displayed.
Comfort stations could be a lot of comfort stations, even for their own maintenance, so they would be clean. I don't think anybody would object some advertising outside on the comfort station. What do you think?
Potentially. David, do you want to talk to us a little bit about concessions on beaches? I think we just need to
Hi, Councilmember Kagan. Thank you for the question. I think, with regard to beaches, I mean, in particular, Coney Island, I have to say, it's an amazing asset, not just for Brooklyn and people, Coney Island, for all of New Yorkers. I go there quite a bit with my family, and it's amazing. we have a number of concessions there with the boardwalk, with Luna Park, the Wonder Wheel. We also partner with the Coney Island Alliance, and they provide a variety of different food options really across the boardwalk. So we're not always just centered on that amusement district. I think with regard to sand, I mean, I will absolutely take another look at it. The matter we've run into in the past is we have to work very closely with DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation. Anytime you do something on sand, there's a lot of requirements and restrictions. Of course, we always want to be as respectful of the environment as possible. And sometimes, as a result of that, it means, just leaving the sand for the beachgoers. But we will absolutely take another look at it.
It is already done in Florida. It's not like I'm not opening any kind of new. It's done already. Many beaches in Florida. I saw it all the time at the beginning of the beach, not at the end, like closer to, in our case, to boardwalk. Like in some sectors, it shouldn't be like every minute, but like large sector, one kiosk will help people to rent something, or like, I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about like chair or umbrella, something like this. It's happening already in Florida.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, to understand, if you're talking about like equipment rentals,
yes.
in terms
yes.
of chairs and umbrellas.
Umbrella, everything water-related activities.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Kagan, I just thankfully, our Deputy Commissioner Mark Folk said to me, there is on our website, there's information about opportunities to have donor recognition and plaques. So we'll make sure you get that. It's on our website, but we'll forward you the information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have questions from Councilmember Ressler.
Time starts now.
Right. Well, firstly, I want to thank my good friend, Chair Krishnan, for chairing this hearing on Earth Day. And I want to thank Commissioner Donahue and the whole Parks Department team. I think more than ever during this pandemic, we have all been extraordinarily appreciative of the really hard work that Parks staff do each and every day to maintain our green spaces. And for most of us in New York City, our parks are our front yards, our backyards. They are the spaces we depend on most, and never more than over these last couple of years when we've all needed to get outside and it was the place that we could socialize. So I really want to express my gratitude there, and just congratulate Commissioner Donahue, who's clearly off to a terrific start, and I think is an inspired choice for the Parks Department. I had a question, and I saw Carter Strickland was on here a moment ago, or maybe it still is, about one way in which we've had a lot of success in getting renovations at some of our SCA playgrounds and schoolyards is through partnerships with the Trust for Public Land. And I think we would all agree that the parks capital process is not as efficient or cost effective as we'd all like it to be. Is the Parks Department seriously considering partnerships like the one SCA has in place, like the one I think even NYCC has been able to do on rare occasion, although we'd certainly like to see that more broadly, to bring in outside partners who can much more cheaply and much more efficiently get our playgrounds renovated? Just as an example, we have a schoolyard in Borum Hill, PS 38, that is in horrible condition. And the Trust for Public Land has come in. It's going to be fixed up in a year, and at a third of the price that it would have cost the Parks Department to do the same work, and a third of the time frame. So just interested if that's something that's on your radar and agenda, Commissioner Donahue, to try and improve our dilapidated playgrounds.
Thank you, Councilmember Ressler, and I appreciate the question. I'm very familiar with the Schoolyards to Playgrounds initiative. I led that during my last tenure at the Parks Department. It was part of Plan YC, and it's when we partnered with the Trust for Public Land to get over 250 schoolyards to playgrounds done. That was done through the School Construction Authority, which as a public authority certainly does have different rules and regulations that guide their process and leads to different timeframes for sure. I am very very much looking forward to working with Carter and any and all partners to help advance and improve our open space. Absolutely. We're in discussions with a number of different entities, and given my past history, definitely a big fan and recognize the importance of innovative approaches like schoolyards to playgrounds. As I mentioned earlier in response to Chair Krishnan's question, I recognize, and we acutely recognize at the Parks Department, we need to be innovative in thinking about approaches to open space. We can't create them in a densely populated city. It can be hard, but we need to think about every single aspect of our open space. So yes, absolutely. I look forward to partnering with Trust for Public Land and other entities to help us to achieve those goals.
Great. And I think if there was an MOU agreement with the Parks Department, with the Trust for Public Land and other partners, I'm only citing them because they're doing great work in my district. But it could be a way to more expeditiously and cost effectively see upgrades where they're needed, and would really welcome, in the same way the SEA has developed an MOU with outside partners, parks exploring similar things. And you deserve a lot of credit on the Schools to Playground initiative. And from the Plan YC days, it's been a tremendous success. I think as Councilmember Narcisse noted, we just want to see it expanded more and more and more and more. And we have great schoolyards in our communities that are closed on the weekends and closed in evening hours, and when they really could be utilized and are vital resources that are fenced off. And so the more that we can work with you to identify the resources to ensure that those locations are open day in, day out, it's critical not just to our health and mental and physical well-being, but also to our safety, because it's so important for our young people to have a place to go. I just wanted to ask about friends groups, if I might. I think we've had varying success at friends groups in parks throughout our district in partnering with the Parks Department, and just wondering if you have any advice. For example, we have the North Brooklyn Parks Alliance in Community Board 1 that's had a kind of storied history, complicated history with the Parks Department, I guess, over the years, kind of inside, outside. If we're looking to strengthen the partnerships, having our friends groups do more to support the maintenance and conditions in our parks, are there any recommendations if we've hit some roadblocks?
Thank you, Councilmember Ressler, for the question. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
We've had friends groups that basically roadblocks in their efforts to try to get involved in improving the conditions, even in putting resources in to improving the conditions and maintenance of our park spaces. And we hit kind of bureaucratic challenges that make it hard for those partnerships to take place. And just wondered if you had any advice on how we could try and unstick some of that.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks so much for the question. Having come from a partner organization myself, I'm very familiar with and supportive of organizations large and small helping us out. And I recognize that, we really need the support of, as I said, elected officials, community groups, friends of groups, partner organizations. And we have a strategic partnerships group here. We have partnerships for parks, many different ways to interact and engage with the Parks Department. So I'm really committed to seeing those and helping those partner groups thrive. And I think there's a whole lot of opportunity to do that. So absolutely committed to eliminating roadblocks and helping that to happen.
Great. I mean, I think the work you did at Prospect Park Alliance was the gold standard in terms of partnership with the department and just doing so much good for our borough. And if you have any specific suggestions for me of people I can reach out to or follow up with, I'd greatly appreciate it. And then I'd be remiss if Chair Krishnan just allows for 10 more seconds. There were a couple budgetary asks from our last hearing that I had raised in questions. I'm happy to follow up in writing, but if there's any additional information on the outstanding cost for the parcels of Bushwick and the park that have not yet been developed, and the costs for developing the park space at Fox Street, it would just be great to get that information from the department as we go through the budget process.
Yep, absolutely. And happy to follow up with that. I'm, Bushwick Inlet, as you and I talked about directly when I was in Brooklyn, there's a number of different factors there that need to be finalized in order to get a cost estimate. I'm not familiar with the second park you mentioned, Councilmember.
I'll send you an email. It's Box Street Park. It's another one of these waterfront parks that was promised in the rezoning 15 years ago and that we have seen very little progress. So it's just, so I appreciate it. I don't mean to distract us at a hearing on another thing, but I'd be remiss not to have just followed up. So I'll send an email over to your team, but thank you very much for your partnership and for all the good work you're doing.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, there are no other questions from council members for the Parks Department. So thank you very much, Commissioner and other members of the Parks Department for appearing today. And at this point, we will now move on to testimony from members of the public who have registered to speak. I'd like to remind everyone that unlike our typical council hearings, we'll be calling on individuals one by one to testify. As I stated earlier, each panelist will be given 3 minutes to speak. So please begin once the sergeant has started the timer and given you the cue to begin. Council members who have any questions for a particular panelist should use the raise hand function in Zoom as well, and I will call on you after each panelist has completed their testimony. At this time, we will hear from Carter Strickland, followed by Lynn Kelly.
Time starts now.
Okay. Thank you to the council, and thank you to Chair Krishnan and the Parks Department for this important hearing. I'm Carter Strickland. I'm the New York State Director for the Trust for Public Land. It is certainly true that parks were a critical infrastructure to help the city through the crisis. Just to illustrate that, we did a recent study, which is cited in the report, on the economic benefits of parks in New York City, which are substantial. But part of that included a finding that there were 527 million visits, based on a survey, every year to parks in New York City, and that's only from residents. And I want to point out that's 50% more than the total number of visitors to the National Park System and New York State parks combined. So it's substantial. On equity, one indicator we use is the number of residents who live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And that's a national statistic. New York City, actually, to its credit, holds itself to a higher standard, but just for comparison between cities. And on that metric, New York City does well with 99% of its residents. There are two issues with it. And one you explored in the committee report is just the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic when schoolyards and playgrounds were closed from April 1 to June 23rd of 2020. By our calculation in looking at our geospatial analysis, that meant the loss of park access for 1 million New Yorkers, dropping citywide access from 99% to 86%. That's pretty substantial, and it was in places like Central Brooklyn, Eastern Southern Queens, Eastern Bronx, and Central Staten Island, places that suffer from a number of other inequities. And that just shows the importance of, in fact, these smaller places. Secondly, the distribution of overall open space is not equitable. Our analysis again shows, similar to the analysis in the committee report, that communities of color in New York City have 33% less park space per person than white communities, and low-income communities have 21% less park space per person within a 10-minute walk compared to high-income communities. And putting those two sort of caveats to New York's otherwise good park access score means that to fix this program, we need to build new parks that will address the inequitable distribution of parks and park size. One way to do that, of course, is the schoolyards, but there's also creative ways to use our other publicly owned assets like streets. So in conclusion, we encourage the council to keep pushing, and the Parks Department to keep pushing on making New York City's park system even more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Lynn Kelly, followed by Carlos Castelcrook.
Time starts now.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to Chair Krishnan and the rest of the Parks Committee Council. I'm Lynn Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of New York Restoration Project. For over 25 years, our organization has planted trees, renovated gardens, restored parks, and transformed open space throughout New York City. We bring resources to neighborhoods and to parks that are often under-resourced, unfortunately, by the city of New York because of the lack of funding given to the Parks Department. In the last year, we've produced thousands of pounds of fresh produce for the city of New York during our COVID, and the 80 acres of parkland that we manage up in Upper Manhattan on behalf of the Parks Department provides much needed open space to tens of thousands of New Yorkers. You heard from my colleague Carter about the report. It's a great report. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do, because it really underscores the need for the 1% for parks. And that's what I want to mention here as a part of my testimony, which is we are proud members of the Playfair Coalition. We agree that Commissioner Donahue is an inspired choice to lead the Parks Department. The commissioner is not a magician. She needs to have the resources to be able to make it work. And this is, if not now, after COVID, and we've seen the increase of use of all of our parks, then when? So we ask that you please join us in pushing the administration to keep to their campaign promises of making sure that 1% for parks is actually restored in the city budget. In our opinion, parks workers are essential workers, and they deserve those adequate resources. We're the only citywide land conservancy that operates in all 5 boroughs, and many of the neighborhoods that we do operate in were hardest hit by COVID, so we've seen the need for open space firsthand. So thank you for having this hearing, for listening to all of us. I love the new format of letting the public go first. That's fantastic. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Carlos Castel-Croce, followed by Rosa Chang.
Time starts now.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Castel-Croce, and I am the Associate for New York City Programs at the New York League of Conservation Voters. NYCC represents over 30,000 members in New York City, and we are committed to advancing a sustainability agenda that will make our people, our neighborhoods, and our economy healthier and more resilient. Our advocacy through the Playfair campaign has exemplified the importance of parks to health, resiliency, and the sustainability of our city. Every year, we slowly see the worsening effects of climate change and dangerous carbon emissions on our daily lives. Right now, we need our parks more than ever. 2.6 million trees in our city remove 1,300 tons of pollutants from the atmosphere and store 1 million tons of carbon each year. As a major source of the city's urban canopy, parks can reduce urban heat island effects by lowering temperatures up to 9 degrees. Parks also contribute to the resilience by fighting flooding, capturing almost 2 billion gallons of stormwater runoff, and ensuring water quality by filtering out as much as 95% of major pollutants. But not all communities benefit equally from parks. Just as environmental justice communities suffer from higher rates of pollution and adverse health problems, they also lack access to green space. Poor neighborhoods and neighborhoods populated by people of color have access to 21% and 33% less park space, respectively. Parks serving primarily non-white populations are also half the size of parks that serve majority white populations and are 5 times more crowded. This exemplifies the disparities environmental justice communities face daily. COVID-19 has only exacerbated these disparities, unfortunately. New Yorkers without access to adequate green space over the past few years haven't had the safe outdoor recreation spaces or cooling effects of parks that made the pandemic bearable for so many of us. We need to expand access to green space so underserved communities can ensure that parks we do have are properly funded and cared for. Investing 1% of the New York City budget in parks will ensure that our parks are safe, clean, and accessible for all. Intro 173 will continue to help us fight for parks equity by highlighting parks that routinely fail inspection, and we can show which parks aren't fully serving the communities and make sure parks in underserved areas get the attention they deserve. We look forward to continued partnership with the council to promote parks equity and fight for 1%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Rosa Chang, followed by Aaron Sanders.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Hello, Chair Krishnan and members of the Committee on Parks and Recreation. My name is Rosa Chang, and I'm the co-founder of Brooklyn Bridge Manhattan, a grassroots community-led nonprofit working to build a new 9-acre public park underneath the iconic Brooklyn Bridge. Every resident in New York City should have equitable access to green space, but as we all know and have discussed today, this is absolutely not the case. Brooklyn Bridge Manhattan represents the unheard voices of Chinatown and the Lower East Side. Within a half-mile radius of the bridge, there are 47,000 residents, 64% who identify as BIPOC, and 20% seniors. 20% of our families are below the federal poverty level. This TRIE neighborhood is one of the city's most densely populated areas and one of the areas most heavily impacted by the pandemic. The Manhattan side of the bridge is neighbored by NYCC Smith houses, the Title I Marie Bertram High School full of low-income racially diverse children, and the long languishing South Street Seaport. Since 2010, there has been only $16 million in open space capital investment in our surrounding communities, and we have only 20% of the city median of open space. And on the Brooklyn side, there is the $370 million publicly funded 85-acre Brooklyn Bridge Park. This extreme contrast shows a clear inequity in how our park spaces are distributed and funded throughout our city. The way to address this is by building more parks in neighborhoods without. We are here to ask for your help because our community has been constantly overlooked and underinvested. We are weighed down by the infrastructural burdens of the FDR and the closed streets from the Civic Center security zone. Our neighborhoods are split apart by the Brooklyn Bridge itself. Each has an economic and health cost. COVID has made it plenty clear that parks are a basic infrastructural necessity in a dense urban environment like New York that should be free and open to all of us. I am here to ask you all to uplift our low-income BIPOC communities by supporting our parks and by helping Brooklyn Bridge Manhattan project bring equitable access to green space. Our proposal includes a resilient floodable park with integrated stormwater retention, playgrounds for all ages and all abilities, and a community and cultural hub. This park would not only benefit the surrounding area, it would benefit the entire city. Its implementation would serve as a massive economic booster by connecting our struggling businesses with the 20,000 daily tourists already crossing the world-famous Brooklyn Bridge, by hiring MWBE contractors and creating over 3,000 local permanent jobs and generating over $400 million of annual economic output. As we recover from the pandemic, Brooklyn Bridge Manhattan would be an invaluable contributor to the revitalization of New York City. I want to formally invite every single one of you on a tour of Brooklyn Bridge Manhattan. We would love your support in making equity in outdoor space a reality for our under-resourced and overburdened populations. The best use of the 9 acres underneath the landmark Brooklyn Bridge is not as a DOT parking lot. It is as a desperately needed park that sustains and nourishes our community. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Aaron Sanders, who will be followed by Jonathan Robinson.
Time starts now.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Sanders, and I'm the Associate Director of Advocacy and Policy at the Natural Areas Conservancy. Thank you, Chair Krishnan and various council members for the opportunity to provide testimony today. The Natural Areas Conservancy is a nonprofit organization that was formed in 2012 with the goal of increasing capacity of NYC parks and its partners to restore and manage 10,000 acres of forests and wetlands under the agency's jurisdiction. Today, I represent our organization, the Playfair Coalition, and the Forest for All Coalition. I am testifying today to highlight the importance of NYC's urban forests, parks, and open spaces, and how they continue to provide innumerable benefits to New Yorkers during the pandemic. I also want to discuss tangible ways that we can improve our parkland after COVID. The COVID-19 crisis highlighted many of the inequalities that New Yorkers face. Uneven access to parks and open spaces is one important example of this issue. A study from the Trust for Public Land found that poorer neighborhoods have 21% less access to parks than wealthier neighborhoods. The disparity is more pronounced among racial lines. Communities of color have 33% less access to parks than white communities. According to our own research conducted by 12 other partner cities that we partner with in the Forests and Cities Network, the Natural Areas Conservancies determined that only 17% of the organizations that we partner with locally and nationally felt that they could adequately fund and support natural areas and wetlands during the pandemic. These findings underscore how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted the New York City park system, the primary means of access to nature and recreation for millions of New Yorkers. parks has become even more important and essential to New Yorkers during the height of the pandemic. When so many places were closed, parks were the only places where we could go and enjoy respite. At its core, this discussion is about how COVID has affected park equity, and it really comes down to the $90 billion plus budget. New York City Parks has been underfunded for decades, and that lack of investment in communities across New York City has become even more glaring during the pandemic, when park use soared. Unfortunately, New York City Parks received less than 1% of the budget. In addition to COVID-related budget cuts, historically, low public funding allocations for NYC Parks has exacerbated this issue. Addressing this inequality is why the Natural Areas Conservancy is a proud supporter of the Playfair Coalition, advocating 1% for parks, and the Forest for All Coalition, advocating for the 30 by 35 tree canopy cover benchmark. And I'll truncate my testimony. In closing, we recognize that COVID has had a severe impact on our park system. Despite these challenges, New Yorkers utilize them more than ever. Our urban forest and park system is a recreational and ecological benefit that we must commit to supporting. I want to thank everyone for listening to my testimony, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jonathan Robinson, followed by David Salton.
Time starts now.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. As Communications Director for Marine Park Alliance, it's vital for me to share with you the concerns of my organization and the constituency it advocates for, specifically regarding the lack of resources and support parks receive to fulfill their critical role in our communities. The city's parks have been underfunded and unfairly funded for far too long now. Marine Park, the largest city park in Brooklyn, has nearly 800 acres of green space across its natural grasslands, salt marshes, and its recreational areas, yet it has nowhere near the needed amount of staffing and upkeep for a park of its size. As things stand, even if it were to receive additional staffing and resources, this would likely come at the expense and to the detriment of another city park. Marine Park Alliance works hard to bridge this gap, providing volunteer programs to maintain the park and free recreational and cultural programming to enrich the experience of all park visitors. Yet this is merely a Band-Aid over a gaping wound, and for a thriving, healthy green space, services like these should be ensured through the city's budget. The mayor can begin to fix this by delivering on his promise to dedicate 1% of the budget to the parks. The COVID-19 pandemic has only further underscored the need for parks and shown how stretched their already thin resources are. As a vital point of connection between social service providers and the people who depend on those services, parks should have an ample budget, not face steep budget cuts that result in the loss of critical parks jobs and services. A course correction is needed now, and the mayor must take action to give the city's parks the 1% of the city budget that he promised. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is David Salton, followed by Jackson Chabot.
Time starts now.
Good morning, and thank you to Chairperson Krishnan and other members of the committee for this opportunity to testify. My name is David Saltonstall. I am the Vice President of Government Relations and Policy for the Central Park Conservancy. A lot of people know the Conservancy as the nonprofit organization that takes care of Central Park, which we do 365 days a year. Our staff manages and cares for virtually every aspect of the park. And we're honored to be stewards of a place that has meant so much to so many New Yorkers. COVID did confront the Conservancy with a lot of challenges, including a 2-month period in the early days of the pandemic when more than 300 New Yorkers were treated in field hospitals set up on the park's East Meadow. I think it was a sight that no one ever expected to see, and hopefully one that we will never see again. Like other parks, COVID also brought us a huge surge of visitors as New Yorkers gravitated outdoors. Central Park now receives more than 42 million visits a year. That's more visitors than any park in the nation by far. It's in fact more visitors than the top 10 national parks combined. Here's another measure just from COVID. In 2021, our teams hauled away 1,850 tons of trash, which was an almost 50% increase over the year before, as people came outside and as the commissioner and others have said, parks became not just our living rooms, but very often our dining rooms and our playrooms. But let me be clear for all of us here at the Conservancy, we know that Central Park is not like other city parks when it comes to resources. Because we are operated as a nonprofit in partnership with the city, and because we have so many generous supporters, we do have resources that other parks do not. But along with the growth of the Conservancy, we have grown our commitment to park equity and to helping other parks. And that dates back years. It's been one of our guiding principles for decades. And that commitment is rooted in not just words, but in actions. Since 2014, the Conservancy's Institute for Urban Parks has worked in over 43 parks across the city in over 34 council districts and provided over 32,000 hours of support across its programs. That includes our work to help maintain the historic Harlem parks. And our 5-borough program spends many, many hours every year helping to train park workers in other parts of the city and to provide equipment and resources. And we do this work because we believe fervently at the Conservancy that everyone, regardless of what zip code they call home, deserves to have access to clean, safe, open spaces. And that's really why we are here today, to stand in solidarity with all those who believe that parks are essential infrastructure and must be treated as such. To say yes to finding new ways to creating open space in underserved neighborhoods, and to say yes to supporting parks as key drivers of physical and mental health. And finally, to say yes to the Playfair Coalition and spending 1% of city resources on city parks, which would be a giant step forward in the fight for park equity. New York City has always been a leader in urban parks. We were also an epicenter of COVID, and we think now is the time to understand our history and weave those two threads together and recognize that parks are essential infrastructure that everybody deserves in every neighborhood. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Our next and final registered speaker for this hearing is Jackson Chabot or Chabot. Please begin when ready.
Thank you. Yes, Jackson Chabot. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackson Chabot. I'm the Director of Public Space Advocacy at Open Plans. Before my testimony, I want to thank Councilmember Krishnan for his approach at the beginning of the hearing, allowing members of the public to testify first. Oftentimes, members of the public are waiting hours on hours, and so kudos to you, Councilmember. Thank you for that. As Open Plans, we care a lot about streets, and you might say, okay, why am I here today about parks? But the fact of the matter is that getting to parks is also a matter of equity. And so if New Yorkers cannot get to parks, then it is not that 10 minutes doesn't matter. And so, you know, part of this, what I want to describe today is the mobility to and through parks, as well as being able to enjoy them. We're proud members of the Playfair Coalition, and so we fully support the 1% for Parks campaign. And I want to encourage the council as well as the Parks Department to use that funding, if it comes through, wisely. We don't need more vehicles in parks through the Parks Department. We need more electric bikes. We need more smaller devices to pick up and remove trash. The getting to parks is really consequential because, as the AM New York article yesterday indicated, traffic deaths are already up 44% over last year in New York City. And this was already on a historically deadly year last year. As I mentioned before, with electric bikes, I both encourage the department to purchase them, but as well to change their levels of enforcement. This has been seen in both Prospect Park as well as in Central Park, where Black and brown New Yorkers and delivery workers are getting ticketed of riding through the park and discouraged from using the park as a mobility corridor. But these are greenways in and of themselves. They're safe places for people to bike, walk, scoot, walk their dogs, etc. So I encourage a thoughtful approach to incorporating e-bikes into the park. The creation of more public space and creativity as a point of conversation today was very heartening and encouraging. I would encourage the Parks Department to think strategically about open streets and places like 34th Avenue as future park space, because the fact of the matter is we live on islands and there's not more space to be had. So therefore we need to reclaim it from other places. And with this, things like open streets, things like 34th Avenue have great potential to become parks. I would also encourage 34th Avenue to be continued to Elmhurst, but that's another conversation. And then in two final points, greenways, as mentioned in the conversation, deserve their fair funding. I often bike on Ocean Parkway and Eastern Parkway, and they're more like mountain biking courses than they are safe places to pleasantly ride. In conclusion, I want to highlight federal funding. And this is something I testified at the Transportation Infrastructure Committee hearing the other day. With federal funding, we have the opportunity to continue the cleanup corps to support both volunteers as well as Parks Department employees. And so with that, appreciate your time today and thank you for holding this hearing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation, all of you. And seeing no other panelists, I will now turn it back to Councilmember Krishnan to offer any other remarks and to adjourn the hearing.
Thank you so much, Chris. Well, I first want to say a big thank you to everyone who came to testify today on this crucial issue, as well as to Commissioner Donahue and all of the Parks Department representatives who are here, who are the staff who every day take care of our city's parks, and all to my colleagues too, who participated in today's hearing. I think as we've seen overall, especially as Commissioner Donahue mentioned on Earth Day, I could think of no better fitting way to commemorate Earth Day than by having a discussion and having a hearing on parks equity. There is so much that we have to do coming out of this pandemic. As we know from our own experience in our communities, to the data itself that we presented today as well, our city can, should, and must do so much more to make sure every community has access to well-maintained quality green space. That requires everyone playing a role, whether it's from our city government, to our conservancies, to our individual communities, to most importantly, our Parks Department, making sure that our parks are well funded, that are equitably funded. And of course, that requires, most importantly, investing 1% or $1 billion in our city's parks. Again, we've seen that is historically not anything new, not even the most that we've done before, but it is correcting a course correction of a systematic over time disinvestment in our parks that needs to be undone. We all have a role to play in ensuring that we address equity in our parks. We all have a role to play in ensuring that every community of New York City can have access to green space, no matter income, no matter race, and no matter the impacts of COVID, because we know that this pandemic has only highlighted longstanding inequalities when it comes to the issues of parks and playgrounds in our city. So thank you all so much for being a part of today's hearing. Looking forward to our continued work together. And in particular, I want to thank most especially all of those on our council's Parks Committee, Monica, Chima, John, Chris, Patrick. I want to thank for my own staff, Gregory Clark too, for all of their hard work for this hearing and for making today possible. Thank you so much. And with that, and my gavel, we'll adjourn today's hearing. Thank you all so much.